long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. My name is constant reader Scott Daly, and this is my automated co-host, Matt. Many other functions.
Would you like me to tell your horoscope?
Yes, please.
You will do a podcast. You will find a horrifying, extremely horrifying thing happens.
Matt, will I pronounce any of the words in this book wrong during the course of the podcast?
No.
Ah, perfect. Great. Thank you. This week on the show, we are covering chapters 4 through 7 of Part 2, Telling Tales of Wolves of the Calla. In this week's reading, Père Callahan continues his story, but does not complete it, and then shows Roland the terrible, awful Black 13 under the floorboards of his church. Then Roland learns about the ladies of the Ariza, and Eddie learns what the wolves look like under masks. But we don't. Then King takes a short jaunt into absolute horror with another Mia dream. The quartet is splintering, the fellowship is breaking, and the wolves are coming. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
So, I've had one thought throughout this series so far that I was really hesitant to say out loud because I'm sure people would find it just outrageous. And that thought is, this has been exciting. This has been riveting, tragic at times, triumphant at others. But I don't think I've ever really felt all that horrified. And that's surprising because it's Stephen King, the master of horror. I mean, the doorkeeper monster was frightening, but more on the spectrum of kind of like a fun, exciting horror. Well, Scott, this week, King just punched me right in my stupid face with how uncomfortable and horrifying his stories can be. And then I had to sit with that horror for the last week.
Good.
So, and without any resolution. So I guess maybe I deserve that in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think you deserve everything that happens to you while reading this book. So yes, I agree with you like that. And it's funny, like, once again, I have to reiterate that I do not when I am planning out the section breaks for these books, I am mostly doing it on page count. I am mostly doing it to try to get as close to even number of pages every week as possible. I am not paying attention to content. You can tell this by the fact that I broke up Callahan's story between these 2 weeks. And if I had been doing it content, I probably would have put these two chapters together, chapter 3 and chapter 4. I did not mean to end our reading this week on the horror story that is Mia's dream and what actually happened and what it means. But hey, sometimes that's how the cookie crumbles.
I mean, honestly, it does work out to be a really sort of perfectly self-contained chunk of story, where each of our groups of quartet members has kind of a little adventure, and all of their adventures sort of parallel each other in the sense that they're like, oh, I learned this important information, but I can't tell it to my friends. And then Jake wraps it up for us nicely at the end, basically being like, hey, this is a problem that we're not communicating. And then so that struck me as kind of a nice way to end this. Although I did have to suffer through this week of not knowing what happened.
I agree. The last chapter, having Jake kind of put to words the concern that we've been having about the lies that are infecting our band of friends and kef mates, was a pretty perfect end to this week's reading. I agree with that. I agree with that a lot.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Matt. Before we get into these chapters, we got to talk about some stuff. So many people noticed last week that we said the name Overholosum very different every time. And yes,
is that true?
Yes, it is. Oh. It is very true. And yes, astute listeners, you are correct. That we did that on purpose because we got a lot of emails about Overholster the week before. What our wonderful listeners who I love, and I want to make it clear as I do this that I love you all, even those of you that send us incessant emails about how wrong I am pronouncing everything. I love you all. What I didn't tell you, Matt, was that I had decided to pronounce another name incorrectly. The name of a one Lupe Delgado. And I'll explain to you the story here. The story was I was reading the book and I read that name, and in my head I said Loop. And I did that because of the podcast, The Adventure Zone, in which there's a character named Loop, spelled Lupe. It's like there's a character named Taco, and Taco has a sister named Loop for Chalupa. And so in my head, I did that when I was reading, and I noticed that as I was reading, and I went, huh, that's weird that my head did that. And then I was like, ooh, I like it. And so I just decided that I was going to pronounce Lupe's name as Loop throughout the podcast. And there was a part of me that was like, I don't want to tell Matt this because I want to see how he reacts. And folks, everyone out there listening, I want you to look at Matt as a model of how to react to these things. And what Matt did was nothing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you knew that it was wrong when I said it, right?
Yeah, I think what my brain actually did was you said it the first time and I was like, is that right? and then every subsequent time I was just like, I guess we're doing this. All right.
Yeah.
You know, folks, spite pronunciations are a big thing on the Doof Media Podcast Network. You know,
it's so true.
We powered an entire Parahumans podcast basically on mispronunciation. So
yes,
everybody loves it. It's I think that's why people come to the show, honestly, is the mispronunciations.
That's it. Yeah. So we'll make sure that throughout the story of Roland and Jacques, that we will continue to meet your expectations.
That's right.
In that regard.
That's right.
Yeah. I know it's called Lupe. I was doing a thing, and the problem is I also forgot that probably a lot of our listeners have never listened to The Adventure Zone and have no idea what that is. And so that's my little in-joke landed on 0 ears.
Yes. Yes.
But the important thing is I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed all the emails I got that said, Loop? Question. It was good fun. I'm sorry I hurt you, folks. Just having some fun.
I can promise you it will definitely happen again.
You will Loop. I mean,
some
over like the thing about Overholster is it was legitimately just a mistake. We just messed up.
Okay. I mean, to be honest, audiobook, I just kind of thought it was Overholster. That's what I heard. Yeah. Sorry, my bad.
It happens. Yeah. And luckily, Lupe Delgado is there. Loop. I don't think we're going to talk about Loop at all in this week's episode, because he's dead.
Yep.
Hey, let's move on to the show itself, shall we?
Sounds good.
All right, we begin this week's discussion with Chapter 4, The Priest's Tale Continued, subtitled Highways in Hiding. And like that chapter says, we continue Callahan's tale here. But first, we are kind of introduced or re-reminded of some of the magic that guided us through Roland's story in the last book. 5 minutes have passed as they walked around the corner from Callahan's church, but they managed to go through 5 years of his story and 2 hours of us talking about his story. So it's like magic. It's magic, Matt. It's Kef. And to Roland, this indicates one thing. Callahan is part of their quartet and would be joining them on their journey when this thing is over. What did you think about that, Matt? Did you expect Callahan to, when he was introduced as a character, to not just be a character, but be joining our 5-man band?
I didn't. And I mean, emotionally, I'm not even sure that I believe it. You know, like a big part of me doesn't expect Callahan to make it out of the Calla. To survive this part of the story. So I don't know if I believe that that's going to happen just because Roland thinks it will. I mean, unmistakably, he does get the opportunity to have this magical palaver and give the quartet his story, which is cool because now the king has introduced this idea that like when people tell their life stories, it kind of invokes this magic. He's leaning on that again to help Callahan tell his story. So storytelling wise, it was important that he tell this story. It's important that the characters know this story. Whether that means, he's definitely going to leave the Calla with them, I'm not so sure.
Cool. Interesting. Well, I mean, we will find out one way or another in like, I don't know, like a month time. Can you believe we're halfway through this book already? No. And I think, I hope we have time to talk about that sort of thing as we go, because it is interesting how this book feels, it feels, it makes you uncomfortable because it's like, it feels like it's building towards something bad, and sure.
Part of that is the pacing, I think. Yeah.
Well, we'll see if we can work that into conversation
okay.
As we go. Callahan resumes his story, telling Susannah, and Roland and Eddie all about his time on what he calls the highways in hiding. Callahan realizes that while he was traveling through the United States, he's actually traveling through worlds as well, going Todash kind of between different New Yorks, different New Jerseys, different New Mexicos, different places all around the world. And I love this line here. He understands instinctively that this is almost certainly true. He has stumbled upon a great, possibly endless confluence of worlds. It's really wonderful language here. I really love it. And I love the certainty with which King characters sometimes just exhibit the known information. Like we, the reader, know this is true, and it helps us process that when our character just says, yeah, no, I know it. This is true.
Yeah. Right. It lets us very seamlessly plug it into this picture of the world that we're building. You know, it's like to us, it's like, okay, I get it. He's become unstuck. He's drifting between levels of the tower. It does put an interesting spin on things. And one thought was kind of hitting me in the midst of this, which is like, I wonder if, and I kind of hope that we get to see this next week, but I wonder if Callahan is just going to kind of continue doing his moving between highways of America all the way to Midworld. Like is there a path? And I don't mean magical doors where there's like a discontinuity. I mean, like, is there kind of a smooth path between New York City and Midworld that doesn't involve, you know, magical teleportation or magical doorways or magical orbs that just kind of looks like him making his way down highways, and those highways gradually transform from recognizable American highways to Midworld highways. I think that would be cool and interesting if it went that way. I don't know if it will though.
Yeah. That's some interesting things to think about there. I mean, we haven't seen that before, right? So it's always been pretty clear demarcation. So yeah, it would be interesting. I mean, we haven't seen this before either. We haven't seen this travel, like the travel between different levels of America, of Earth, you know, like this is entirely new. Yeah. So who knows how far it can go.
Right. And we don't understand why either. All we really know is that he got some of the vampire's blood. That may have been enough. But it may be something else entirely. Right.
Yeah.
Like we don't know why he's able to do this really.
No. His hiding on these highways though is, I think, really just this beautiful depiction of America, Matt. I mean, King is doing something very surreal and otherworldly here, but he's also capturing just this like truism of this country, that this country is this really enormous, expansive space stuffed with just endless highways in which one could completely lose themselves, wind up in a new town with a new name and be basically in a new world. And I think when I was thinking about this, I was thinking a lot about Neil Gaiman and his novel American Gods, in which he depicted this on the road, crossing highways, road tripping lifestyle in America, just absolutely beautifully. And of course, he put it in the genre trappings of old gods and new gods, and it's a really wonderful book. And that book came out 3 years before this one, so I do have like a hard time believing King. Like, first of all, I know he read it because I know Stephen King, and he's a voracious reader and he loves shit like that. So there's no way he didn't read American Gods. And I wonder if he was thinking about that. And I think he was kind of channeling what Neil Gaiman was trying to depict about the country when he's writing these Callahan sections.
Yeah, they're both love letters to America and to the wide open road of America. That it's entirely possible that he was inspired by that. I like that a lot. I was, just captivated because driving long distances or traveling long distances in the US is already kind of a mystical experience in real life, like, like you go for a long cross country drive, the terrain changes, the biosphere changes, you pass by weird, unique buildings and mysterious looking tourist traps. You realize that, like, even if you stopped at just the ones that actually look really interesting, you'll never see all of them in a lifetime. And King really captures this feeling perfectly, I think, by using the genre conceit of like, oh well, it's magic. He's sort of going Todash here across the universe, and it ironically captures the reality of it by making it hyper real and hyper stylized.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think I think there is like, we tend to homogenize America, right? Like if we don't do it as like, this is America, we are Americans, we do it as like, this is West Coast or coasts versus Central America, right? We tend to we group and lump and build these giant groups of people, but this country is so vastly different depending as you drive through it. And it is this expansive space where you can be in the same country and yet you meet people that seem like they're from a completely different world, architecture that seems like it's from a completely different world, like geography. You're totally right. Like it's this magical thing about this country, and that is part of what King is channeling here. Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember driving from Houston to Denver, which is I think the longest drive I've ever done, and we passed by what I'm pretty sure had to be like extinct volcanoes. And I was like, why are there extinct volcanoes in America? I still don't know what they really were, but like they looked exactly like volcanoes. Anyway, like that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, where you're like, is this real? Am I seeing this? And it's such a big place that it's full of stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wonderful world we live in.
Yep.
So Callahan continues to hide on these highways and run, and he kills some vampires occasionally, but he doesn't normally because like he's so afraid he's being chased. He constantly sees the low men around him. We get to see a little bit more about them. They have these creepy red eyes. It's really wonderful. And we kind of like throughout this, we like flit in and out of different stories. Like there are different characters with different names in a different part of the world. And I don't think, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, I did some cursory research, but not that much. I don't think any of the specific stories that are characters that are referenced here in this section are references to other Stephen King novels, but it feels like they could be, right? Like you meet some of these characters and it's like just like this kind of amalgamation of what could be a very nuanced King character that he's done in the past. It feels that way. I really, really love it. I really love it.
Yeah, I don't know if this is exactly what you mean, but it kind of reminds me of like when we first met Calvin Tower, and I was like, I don't know if this is going to be a recurring character or if this is the only time we meet this character. You really can't tell with King.
Yeah, definitely. And he's doing something different with the writing here, Matt. Like he's channeling something a bit different here. I still recognize Stephen King in it, but it's kind of like he's throwing his voice a little bit. Like he's trying to change it just a little bit. Like listen to this: picking oranges in Florida, pushing a broom in New Orleans, mucking out horse stalls in Lufkin, Texas, handing out real estate brochures on street corners in Phoenix, Arizona, working jobs that pay cash, observing the ever-changing faces on the bills, noting the different names in the papers. Jimmy Carter's elected president, but so are Ernest Fritz Hollings and Ronald Reagan. George Bush is also elected president. Gerald Ford decides to run against him, and he is elected president. The names in the papers, those of celebrities change the most frequently, and there are many that he has never heard of, don't matter. The faces on the currency don't matter. What matters is the sight of a weather vane against a violent pink sunset, the sounds of his heels on an empty road in Utah, the sound of the wind in the New Mexico desert, the sight of a child skipping rope beside a junked-out Chevrolet Caprice in Fossil, Oregon. What matters is the whines of the power lines besides Highway 50 west of Elko, Nevada, and the dead crow in a ditch outside Rain Barrel Springs. Like that's not the way Stephen King normally writes, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit different.
No, it feels like he is telling this whole story through the voice of Father Callahan telling the story, even though it's not in quotes. It's not explicitly Callahan telling the story. I mean, honestly, it reminds me of how really the whole Hambry section of the previous book, it feels completely different from, anything from Eddie Dean's point of view, for example. It feels very different from anything that I remember reading of King's outside of this. So like, I think that when we're in these sort of telepathic storytelling sections, he is really getting into the head of the person telling the story. And here he's getting into Father Callahan's voice.
Yeah, definitely. I want to tell a fun story about this section that I just read right there, though. It's not my story. It's someone else's story, but it's a good story.
Go for it.
And I want to share it. So that one line there, mucking out horse stalls in Lufkin, Texas. One of the critics I greatly admire, film critics and television and novel critics as well, is a woman named Meredith Borders. She is currently managing editor of Fangoria magazine, the horror magazine, and she loves Stephen King. I'd love to have her on the show someday. Maybe possibly we'll get lucky and get to have her on the show. But she shared this story on her Twitter years ago about how she was obsessed with the Dark Tower series and she loved it. And this was back in the 90s, after Wizard and Glass, but before this book, where everyone was like, Stephen, please finish the books. Please finish the books. And she wrote Stephen King a letter. And it was basically like explaining to him how much his writing means to her, how much the Dark Tower as a story means to her, and basically begging him to finish the story. And he wrote her back. He wrote her back and thanked her for her letter and had some very kind things to say to her. And she was from Lufkin, Texas. That's where she grew up. It was a very small town in East Texas. That's where she grew up. And that's one of the things she said was living in such a small, East Texas town, like his books were windows to other worlds that she hadn't seen yet. And then this book comes out, and where is Father Callahan? He's mucking out horse stalls in Lufkin, Texas. So I think that just shows the type of person Stephen King is, that years later he remembered this conversation, that this letter that this teenage girl sent him had such a powerful effect on him that when he was, plotting out where Father Callahan is going to go, he was like, Lufkin, Texas. It's so great.
That is great. Yeah, that makes me happy. It's he seems pretty awesome. I don't remember if I talked about this. I don't think I did, but like I just went on YouTube and watched just like Stephen King give like a 1 hour, like sort of not off the cuff, because I'm pretty sure it was prepared, but just kind of a 1 hour talk on writing and life and all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. And he's just great.
He is. He really is.
I was like, I'm personally always a little apprehensive when I like see an author actually talking, because I'm like, oh no, they're going to disappoint me, and I'm going to not be able to see their books the same way anymore. But like, I came away from that just being like, oh, he's great. I love him. Same as I did before. So anyway.
Yeah. He's one of those people, like he can be like very relaxed, and I don't think he takes himself that seriously, but he takes the craft of storytelling and writing and stories in general extremely seriously, but he can talk about it in such a relaxed way. I love him too. I love him too. That's why after the show, we're going to start our next podcast called Danse Podcabre, which is where we read that book and then watch all the movies that he talks about it in.
Yeah, let's workshop that name, Scott.
No, it's really clever.
Okay.
Because it's Dance Macabre.
All right,
but
we'll talk later.
Dance Podcabre.
Yeah. No, right? I get it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
All right.
Screw you. You're off the show. I'll find someone else.
All right. Well, way to get around. Anyway, I just wanted to raise something that I noticed about the Low Men. Mm-hmm. Which is that I'm not really sure why they're following him. Like, is it just because he's killing vampires? Do they really care about and want to protect like these extremely minor, shitty vampires that he's killing? Mm-hmm. Is Callahan like really enough of a threat that they want to catch him? Like, or is it that they like expect him to become a threat? Anyway, it's just something that was nagging at me as something that I wanted to understand.
Yeah. I mean, we do know that they are not looking for just him, right? We see the same kind of posters and messages that he saw about him, like the missing pet poster. He saw about himself in New York, and he sees another one. I forget which city he was in, but he sees one there that's about someone else. So they are not looking for just him. They're looking for other people too, but they are looking for him. You're right about that. And we don't know. Yeah. What are they doing? Why are they doing it? Why are they looking for people in general? For who? I mean, we know that they're agents of the Crimson King, but that's it. That's all we know.
Yeah. Right. Sure. Yeah. I wondered why he was on their radar specifically. And I'm obviously we're going to figure out more about them. Like, I think they're going to be a thing going forward.
Yeah. So he's out in Sacramento, California, and I love this part here. He's working with some day laborers, and he says the names of his companions come back to him years later like names spoken in a haze of fever: Escobar, Estrada, Javier, Esteban, Rosario, Echeverria, Cavera. Are they all names you will later encounter in the Calla? Or is this just a booze hallucination? For that matter, what is he to make of his own name, which is so close to that of the place where he finishes up? Calla, Callahan, Calla, Callahan. Sometimes, when he's long getting to sleep in his pleasant rectory bed, the two names chase each other in his head like tigers in Little Black Sambo. I love this because he's basically like experiencing Ka in a way. He doesn't have the name for it yet, and he doesn't and he's not even sure if he believes it yet. But this is Dickens, right? This is the Dickensian coincidences, the Ka-induced coincidences that are driving everyone, especially Eddie, crazy a few chapters ago, are happening to him right now.
Yeah. This is one of the things that made me think that he's going to die here, because it's like his. It says right there, it's where he ended up, right? It's like, well, if he ended up here, then it would be weird for him to go on to new adventures. But anyway, that's minor. I do think it is really good and useful for us to have this extra angle of insight into Ka. Like Callahan has a very distinct voice. We just talked about that. He's a very distinct character from the other characters, and he really allows us to see and allows King to emphasize certain facets of this elaborate Ka concept that we haven't really noticed or been emphasized before.
Yeah, I mean, we have Roland, who is kind of born into understanding this belief system, and then we have the rest of his quartet who were kind of given a crash course in it. Callahan serves as someone who's been experiencing this thing for years. He's been in the Calla for years. And he was on the road for years as well. So he has a much more mature angle on this whole thing, and then everyone else in the quartet. Roland aside, but he can have a much clearer view on it than Roland can, because Roland's coming from within it,
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. He had to figure it out for himself, and that's useful for us. Yeah.
Eventually, Callahan reads a newspaper and finds that his old friend and owner of home, Rowan Magruder, was killed by a couple of Nazis. Ones that we already know, because we heard this early in the story, will be the ones that carve the cross in his head, which is actually just an unfinished swastika. So we know, he's going to go back there, and we know it's not going to end up good for him because he gets a cross carved in his head by these folks. But he does hop a plane back to New York City to go to the funeral, and that's where he puts a pause on his story for now. And we don't get to find out the end of the story yet. We don't find out how he came in possession of Black 13 and how he got here. That is left for future chapters.
Yeah, I've definitely loved Callahan's story. It's interesting how much detail we're going into about stuff that has nothing really obvious to do with our time in the Calla, right? Like we haven't.
Sure.
I'm not saying King needs to move things along. I think this is great. and I actually have faith that all this stuff with vampires is probably going to be relevant in some way. I don't know, whatever. The point is, it is interesting how long this story is without us really understanding how the heck did he get to Midworld?
Yeah.
How did he get the orb?
I think they say at the end of this chapter, he basically admits that the purpose of the story is to tell how he got a hold of the Black 13. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, so we just did 2 chapters on this and we haven't gotten to the purpose of the story yet? Okay.
That's funny, yeah.
That's a choice, yeah. But yeah, I mean, King loves to go into detail. He can't just have a character tell a story. He has to inhabit the story, and that's just what he does.
Well, and I love it. I prefer it to the alternative. But
yeah. We get this one little note that I just wanted to touch on. As Callahan is pausing his story, he said, "I had to get off those highways in hiding." He gave Eddie a small nod. "The Toadash turnpikes. They're as addictive as the booze." "More," Roland said. He saw 3 figures coming towards them, Rosalita shepherding the Tavery twins, Frank and Francine. The girl had a large sheet of paper in her hands and was carrying it out in front of her with an air of reverence that was almost comic. "Wandering's the most addictive drug there is, I think, and every hidden road leads on to a dozen more." "You say true. I say thank you," Callahan replied. He looked gloomy and sad, and Roland thought, a little lost. And I love this, Matt, because if Callahan is truly becoming a member of this quartet and will depart the Calla with them, we've long talked about how everyone on the content is everyone in the content is a facet of Roland, part of him, the addiction, the inner struggle, his like lost boyhood, that kind of thing, his willing to sacrifice. Part of the lessons he needs to learn is reflected in these people. Callahan, with that in mind, is Roland's wandering self, is the person we saw at the very beginning of Gunslinger, the person that had been wandering and had spent the thousands of years of his life wandering.
Yeah, I love that. It's really interesting because being a wanderer is, if anything, the most kind of immediate and obvious facet of Roland. It's right. Yeah. It's almost so obvious that it doesn't bear comment. It's his archetype. It's the man with no name wandering between towns like a wraith, and that's who he's introduced as, actually. So it makes a lot of sense that obviously an important aspect of his character, and it makes a lot of sense that it's being foregrounded here. Yeah,
and I mean, I think it's like you could ask the question, well, why wasn't this aspect of him focused on more earlier in the earlier books? Why did we not have one of us Katet representing this earlier, and why are we having it now? And I think, to me, my explanation, Watsonian explanation for that is, in these chapters, we are seeing a Roland who, as his Katet is splintering, as the lies increase, we are seeing a Roland that is increasingly falling back on old habits. I think we're about to talk about that a little bit later, when Roland is wondering to himself, I'm all alone again, right?
Yeah.
He is falling back on the person he used to be before, as things are getting tough and his group is splintering. And that is dangerous. Yeah. That is explicitly in the story, that is dangerous. And Callahan here is a person representing that old aspect of Roland that had kind of been pushed away as he has embraced his family. And so perhaps the introduction of this character can help Roland remember the bad choices attached to that aspect of himself.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, Roland has been keeping his own counsel a lot. He's been acting a lot more kind of ruthlessly and maybe even cruelly. Like later on, we're going to talk about that. And, in contrast here, Callahan is this guy who did have this long wandering phase, but now he is this, a fixture of the community. He's a community leader. He's the priest, So yeah. Well, he doesn't call himself that, does he? I don't remember. But anyway, he's an important guy, and he's put down roots. And so maybe that will help Roland deal with what he's dealing with right now.
He won't let them call him priest. No. Yeah. So with promises to finish the story later, Roland takes Eddie to the two map-making twin children to check on their work drawing the map of the Calla. And they did, as we are told, an excellent job. And both Roland and Eddie are like enamored with their work and thank them very much for their help. And I love this part here. Thank you big, Roland said. He took Francine's hand in his left, Frank in his diminished right. You may have saved lives with your hands and eyes. I love this, Matt, so much. Like these two children start crying because they're so touched by the gunslinger's kind words here, by what he said to them and what he allowed them to participate in. And I think what King is doing with these kids is so clever. He's kind of reminding us and our characters of the stakes of this. If they don't do something here, one of these two children might come back ruined. And the hands, how he emphasizes that with the hands. Francine in his left, Frank in his diminished right. Two hands, two children. One will remain safe. One will be diminished. It's powerful imagery.
That's really great. Yeah. I don't think I noticed that, but that's clearly there to be noticed, and I adore that. Yeah. You could even view it as direct foreshadowing of like which will be which, although I'm not going to say that's the case, because I hope that neither of them gets taken. But it makes me want to pay more attention to Roland's hands as a symbol in general, because it's like a perfect tool to use here, like another parallel between him and Callahan, right? Because Callahan has his scarred and damaged hand. Yeah. That also has a kind of meaning within the story. So absolutely. I now that you've pointed this out, I'm like, okay, I need to be paying more attention to hands and what that means exactly.
Well, and he says to the kids, you may have saved lives with your hands, right?
Exactly.
Like, and Roland saves lives with his hands all the time. It's his method is through death, though, and they're like. I do not shoot with my hand. I do not shoot with my eye. Right. These are two of the gunslinger's credos right here. Your hands and your eyes may have saved lives, and they did it through drawing, through creation, through copying, through map making. It's just very, there's a lot of really fun symbols and imagery going on here.
Yeah, it's a great moment.
So returning to the church, Roland decides to go take a look at Black 13 with Callahan, and I love this moment here. Roland unbuckled the gun belt and handed it to Eddie, who was wearing the other one. Then he unslung his purse and handed it to Susannah. This is it's so good and subtle, but King has Roland hand the gun to Eddie, who he takes time to point out that he is already strapped, right? He already is holding one of the guns. So this is like a superfluous gun. He's handing the gun to Eddie because he's about to go look at the thing and he doesn't want to be armed when he walks in this church. But he's not going to give that gun to Susannah. He's not going to do it. Instead, she gets the purse, the harmless thing, the thing that he knows she can't do any trouble with. And it's like the book doesn't comment on this, but I just think the fact that King takes the time to point out that Eddie is indeed wearing the other gun already, that I think draws attention to this.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I think it's intentional. I found myself wondering, actually, because it's so noticeable. I was like, oh, Susannah's going to notice this and comment on it. Like, why would he do that, right? And but then again, I'm not surprised that she didn't, because like I think the way that her whole deal works is she'll go out of her way to avoid noticing anything that would lead to awkward conversations that would expose one of her parts that doesn't want to be exposed. So like which is also a bad sign. Like if she had pointed it out, at least then they could have had that conversation, but she didn't even notice it, which, I mean, Susannah, you think of as being somebody who's going to notice that sort of thing. Sure.
Yeah. I think that's totally fair. Yeah, absolutely. Love it.
Yeah.
So Roland enters the church and he feels a hum. But this hum, unlike the rose, is one of emptiness. I love the comparison here, Matt. At the rose, there was a hum, there was singing, but he felt purpose, concordance. Everything that good happens by chance, every random coincidence, every chance meeting for good, every fork in the road where you chose the right path, like that's what he felt there. And it was calm and pure and good. Here with Black 13, it's not even evil, right? It's not the wrong choice. It's not the bad path. It's not random suffering. It's just emptiness. It's just nothingness. And it says here, he had faced both men and monsters in his time, but had never been close to anything like this. The sense of evil was terrible, almost unmanning. The sense of its malevolent emptiness was far, far worse. So it's evil. It's definitely evil, but worse than evil is nothing, is nothingness.
Yeah, right. It's fascinating. I think this emptiness idea is probably meant to connect to this sort of like infinite void underlying everything that Eddie glimpsed when he was returning from Todash. And, it really, I'm starting to put together some things potentially, like drawing kind of a duality between void and substance, nihilism and meaning, chaos and order, where, the bad forces align with either emptiness or chaos or something of that flavor, and the good forces align with structure and order. And the rose is depicted as being this thing that everything is kind of hanging by, almost. The rose in the tower, everything is kind of hanging over the void, the void of emptiness. And it's all very metaphysical, but I think it also is worth taking the time to figure out, because like this is kind of what's going on in the bigger picture of the story.
Yeah, I like it.
Cool.
I like it. Cool. Let's keep that in mind as we continue through.
Okay.
So the box that holds Black 13 in it has 3 objects printed on it: a rose, a stone, and a door. And also is a word printed that while they don't know what language it is, they can somehow read it, that says unfound. Callahan notes nicely enough for us that this imagery makes sense. The rose, the stone, and the door are symbols that very closely match symbols from a book back in his where. It's a book called Look Homeward, Angel by Thomas Wolfe. And the reference that we're making here is actually in the opening lines of the book of this book, which is very poetic. It's Thomas Wolfe. That's the way he writes. I've never read this book, so I can't really comment on the whole story, but I want to read this opening that references the stone, the leaf, and the unfound door. And then maybe we can talk about it a little bit. A stone, a leaf, and an unfound door. A stone, a leaf, a door. And of all the forgotten faces, naked and alone we came into exile. In her dark womb we did not know our mother's face. From the prison of her flesh we come into the unspeakable and incommunicable prison of this earth. Which of us has known his brother? Which of us looked into his father's heart? Which of us has not remained forever prison pent? Which of us is not forever a stranger and alone? A waste of lost in the hot mazes, lost among bright stars on this weary, unbright cinder, lost. Remember, speechlessly we seek the great foreign forgotten language, the lost lane, end unto heaven, a stone, a leaf, an unfound door. Where? When? O lost and by the wind grieved ghost, come back again. Whew. That's heavy. It's heavy.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It is.
And, yet again, King is making literary references that I don't understand, weaving them into the tapestry of the book, hinting that maybe, this world stole something from this book, or maybe Thomas Wolfe was channeling something from this world, or maybe if you look through the lens of Ka, it's somehow both of those at the same time. It's just like cosmic Dickensian rhyme of these ideas across space and time with no true origin. I don't know. Something like that.
And this is, understanding poems, not my expertise, but this is a very nihilistic little passage here, right?
Yeah. It reminds you, it's that feeling of emptiness, right?
Yeah, of nothingness. Like naked and alone we came into exile. In her dark womb we did not know our mother's face. From the prison of her flesh we came into the unspeakable and incommunicable prison of this earth. So it's like we've always been imprisoned. Like, which of us has known his brother? Which of us has looked into his father's heart? Which of us has not remained forever prison pent? Which of us is not forever a stranger and alone? Like, you are always a prisoner and you are always alone, no matter where you are, no matter what happens to you.
Yeah. You're just lost.
You're lost. Yeah.
That is very heavy. That is very heavy for sure. The lines particularly about like being in the prison of your mother's flesh and then being born, that's pulls to mind the idea that we have this demon baby.
Totally.
But right? I think it's more, I don't think it's just like, oh, we're making a demon baby reference. I do think it has to do with this idea of like existence is pain, the world is suffering. Like it's a very, I don't mean to, like, it's a very powerful poem, but in a certain sense, it's pretty emo, right? Like,
Sure. Yeah. It is like, it is in line with what we understand of what Black 13 is and what Black 13 represents, right? This emptiness, this meaninglessness, this nihilism. But once again, like the end here, remembering speechlessly, we seek the great forgotten language, the lost lane, and end into heaven, a stone, a leaf, an unfound door. So this is like, we are searching for a way, like we are forever imprisoned, forever alone. And yet we toil on this earth, searching for a way into heaven, searching for a way out of prison, out of misery, out of this existence. We're searching for it in a stone, a leaf, and an unfound door, and it is changed to rose, right? So it's like the leaf is changed to rose, and we know what the rose represents. The stone, no idea. The unfound door,
lots of doors.
Our characters, their story is rife with doors, and right now they're trying to hopefully find a door to take them to where they need to go to deal with this real estate stuff in New York City. So it is nihilistic, but it's like it's almost like a challenge. It's like you're trying to find this path, you're trying to find this way, and it's like challenging you.
Well, it's beautiful. It does capture, it's one of those things where it captures a feeling that you've had, but maybe not known you had, where you feel like you're searching for something without quite realizing that there is something that you're searching for. It's just kind of an aimless searching feeling. So the stone, the leaf, the door stand in for this object, which we feel that we're seeking, which we can't quite put our finger on, maybe.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
And let's get more metaphysical here real quick.
Okay.
We got this quote here. Faintly, Roland heard the chime of bells, a sound so beautifully hideous it made you want to grind your teeth against it. For a moment, the walls of Père Callahan's church wavered. It was as if the thing in the box had spoken to them. Do you see how little it all matters? How quickly and easily I can take it all away should I choose to do so? Beware, gunslinger. Beware, shaman. The abyss is all around you. You float or fall into it at my whim. Amazing.
Yeah.
Like it's the nihilism, like just we said with the literary quote, it's taunting them.
Right.
It's taunting them with its power and with their insignificance against it.
Yeah, it definitely makes us think in this moment that it's like sentient and has, you know, reminds you more of the One Ring or something, where it's like it's messing with you. Because I mean, just the fact that it the voice of the whatever here is calling him a shaman.
Yeah, that's a direct reference to Salem's Lot, right? Yeah,
exactly. It's what the vampire called him. So it's like, okay, the evil. This thing's definitely evil. Yeah, it's. I guess it's kind of being like, this is a character. This is the orb is a character, actually.
Yeah. I will also say a fun little reference here. The last line here, you float or fall into it at my whim. We all float down here is an It reference. And I think he is channeling that a little bit here. He's winking at us a little bit here.
Yeah, I mean, when you pointed out, that word almost seems a bit off in this context, but when you mentioned that, I immediately like, oh yes. It's the evil thing. We all float down here. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I love the badness in here. I think one thing that I noticed this time, how often King uses sound to express evil and bad, right? Like we had the thinny and the horrifying, horrible sound of the thinny, and then now in this book we've got the Toadash bells, the Kimmer, I think it was called. I can't remember. The Toadash bells is this horrible sound here. This so beautifully hideous it made you grind your teeth against it. It's interesting how King is using these sounds to express this evil. I like it.
Yeah, right. It's absolutely. It doesn't sound Hawaiian, but
No.
You can't really I can't really imagine what beautifully hideous sounds like. Although I can imagine what a saw sounds like. You know.
Sure.
But yet my brain has a certain feeling about that, and that's kind of all that matters.
All right, so let's finally, 45 minutes into our show, move on to our second of 4 chapters. Oh no, it's happening again.
Not again.
Let's move on to chapter 5, The Tale of Grey Dick. And we begin this chapter with Roland out visiting Jake at Cy Eisenhardt's. Did I say that name right, Matt? Just to make sure.
I think so.
Just to make sure.
Who knows?
Cy Eisenhardt's Rockin' Bee Ranch. There's something really quaint and wonderful about the beginning of this chapter, Matt. We kind of start with both Ben Slightman and Jake swinging off the barn into a pile of hay as Andy the robot looks on just to make sure to protect them in case they miss the hay bale. It's domestic, it's quaint, it's lovely, but all Roland can think about is the wolves, and this refrain, 23 days now. And Mia, who he's decided, because of the otherworldly nature of this pregnancy, could give birth at any time. And he has this wonderful moment of like, oh no, she could give birth 23 days from now, and that would be horrible. And he says, as Eddie says, coincidence is canceled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's perfect.
Love it.
Yeah, I think these moments are some of my favorite stuff. You know, how King weaves together these moments of homey warmth and goodness with worry about the incoming demon baby. It all just seems to reinforce and strengthen itself, like with the darkness highlighting the good, and the good making the darkness feel more threatening unless we care more about it. Kind of like we talked about a couple of weeks ago with how King, he does write beauty and goodness.
Yeah, I like it. So Roland is chatting with Mr. Eisenhardt here, who is still one of the holdouts, one of the ones that doesn't think that going up against the wolves is a very good idea. But unlike Telford, Eisenhardt's much less of a prick about it. And I appreciate how much King is allowing us to witness this learning of the people of the town. Like we are not skipping right to the action. We are not skipping right. We're spending time with our characters as they learn these people and learn their reasons and learn their ways of life. And Eisenhardt's choice here, I think, makes sense. He says, "We bide, gunslinger. Even in the face of the wolves, we bide. Once there was a Gilead, and now there's Gilead no more. No one knows better than you, but still we bide. If we stand against the wolves, all that might change. And that's kind of what we talked about last week, right?
Yeah, it definitely is something we touched on last week, that, you know, we're going out of our way to show that these people who don't want to fight, they're not simply cowards. In fact, I was thinking about it, and I was like, from a utilitarian standpoint, they might be making the right choice because like fewer lives are lost if they just surrender. Which, I mean, it's funny, the course of our podcasting together has actually seen me go from being a fairly dogmatic utilitarian to being pretty skeptical of utilitarian arguments. But like, this is one occasion where King is, I think, kind of giving all sides of this situation their due.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing is here, whether or not you agree with his logic, you understand it. Mm-hmm. That you understand why someone would look at this situation, look at everything they have, and despite the horror of some of it, the unknown horror is so much scarier.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
You get it. Yeah.
Yep.
So there's some Eisenhardt's wife, Margaret, shows up, and she doesn't quite share her husband's opinion on biting. And I love this character, and I love how King demonstrates just how much of a badass she is right away. Like, this chapter, the rest of this chapter is basically the Margaret is a badass chapter. But here, even at the top, even before we kind of show how good she is with the Ariza, we see her skill with words, right? Because her husband's arguing, cool eyes see clear. And she says, perhaps, she said, watching the boys run back into the barn. They were bumping shoulders and laughing, each trying to get to the ladder first. Perhaps but the heart must call for its rights too. And a man or woman who doesn't listen is a fool. Sometimes 'tis best to swing on the rope, even if it's too dark to see if there's hay there or not. So she just like is watching her kids play and arguing with her husband, and just like crafts the perfect fucking metaphor in real time. It shows her competence. Yeah. Like, it's really great. I love her.
Yeah. Right. I mean, she's the hyper competent person in this dynamic. It does come out of nowhere and become my favorite part of this whole part of the story. Maybe my favorite part of today's reading, actually, just how thoroughly and perfectly she wins this argument with her you know, just her overall emotional appeal here. And you know, that's the thing, like I was saying a second ago about utilitarianism, like you kind of can only win this sort of argument through emotion, because the risk that Roland and that she is asking the community to take is actually an enormous risk. It's just an objectively enormous, terrible, terrifying risk. So you have to make a successful emotional appeal, and that is what she does, and she does it very successfully.
She does, absolutely. It's great, and even Roland is like, "Hell yeah!" Yeah. So Roland asks the Eisenhardts what weapons they have, and they talk about bow or ba, and it turns out that Cy Eisenhardt likes the ba, which is the crossbow, but they do have one more weapon, and to explain what it is, we must first learn the tale of Grey Dick.
All right.
So we learn the tale of this woman, Lady Ariza, who is this badass woman who tricks a dumb outlaw prince into a naked feast and then chops his head off with a sharpened dinner plate. Jesus Christ, do I love Stephen King. Here's like, okay, so Stephen King names this person Grey Dick and then has the most amount of fun with that possible. Grey Dick's head flew out through the open door and into the foyer behind him. For a moment longer, Grey Dick's body stood there with his penis pointing at her like an accusing finger. Then the dick shriveled, and the dick behind it crashed forward onto a huge roast of beef and a mountain of herbed rice. The dick shriveled and the dick behind it crashed forward is the best thing ever, and I love it so much.
That's the kind of, like, King's stories within a story are so great, because he could just yada 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 through this, right? He could just be like, yeah, it's a folk tale about a plate, but like he adds these beautiful, like, hilarious details that you're gonna remember forever. And it really, I think, improves just the whole. I think this is part of his whole thing. This is why he's great. Honestly, this is why he's great. Is he invests so much energy in these little details where you don't even realize the impact the details are having on you, but they're totally immersing you in such a powerful way.
It's great.
But anyway, Scott, at exactly this point, I was like, oh my God, it's the first special plate. I'm so proud of myself for noticing. And then King just tells us, yeah, it's the first special plate.
Yeah, it was a plate both Detta and Mia would have recognized. Yeah. A blue plate with delicate webbed pattern, a 4 special plate.
Yeah. I mean, I still have questions, obviously, but yeah, it's pretty fun and surprising to see this here.
Yeah. And of course, on the plate, we see there's a bunch of rice stalks, and 2 of the rice stalks are crossed in what could have been the great letter ZN, which by itself means both Zai, eternity, and now. So that's more cosmic stuff.
The audiobook reader actually says Z sub N, which is
interesting,
which is more of a mathematical notation. Like people familiar with math, you'd like if there's X with a subscript. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting. Which is not I assume this is a midworld thing, anyway. So many questions though. Did Susannah actually see one of these Oriza cutting weapon plates? Did she have like an interaction with some woman from the Calla or from Midworld in her childhood? Am I being too literal here? Is it actually like, no, there was just some important blue plate that she broke, and because everything kind of cosmically rhymes, now they have important blue plates here? Or is it, did she really see one of these plates? So many questions.
Yeah, it's a shame there's nobody here to answer any of them.
Yeah, nobody here to answer. No way to find out at all.
Nope. So we learn here that the Calla has a large group of women called the Sisters of Oriza. It's a woman's group. It caters events. It holds sewing circles and quilting bees. Oh, they also throw really sharp steel plates at targets from time to time.
Yep. As you do.
I love this moment here, Matt. Have it as you like, she said. Roland saw she was actually pleased, that she wanted an audience, and his hope grew. He thought it increasingly likely that this pretty middle-aged wife with her small breasts and salt and pepper hair had a hunter's heart. Not a gunslinger's heart, but at this point he would settle for a few hunters, a few killers, male or female.
I'm going to go ahead and start referring to Margaret as Eowyn, the woman who is unexpectedly good at weapons and ends up stabbing the Witch King in the face at the crucial moment of the story. Okay,
you do that. You do that.
I'm using my fail-safe prediction tool to guess that she's going to be a badass at an important juncture.
I do think there is some cruelty to Roland here. I mean, so Margaret does her demonstration, right? And she chops a potato in half from like really far away. It's like super impressive and amazing. And we see here, Roland immediately recognizes her discomfort with this whole thing. And it's kind of channeling back to this idea that the gunslingers had, where like you get in the zone and you do the work that needs to be done. And then in the aftertime, there's always this cold feeling, this feeling of horror at the violence that your hands have just committed, and that is what Margaret feels here. And Roland doesn't care about that, because like, we need a few killers, we need a few, male or female, we need some hunters, we need some killers here, and we will use them, despite their horror at that feeling.
Yeah, part of this is just his gunslingerliness, but part of it, I think, is, like we've mentioned, as he disconnects from his quartet, I do think he is regressing into a crueler and less patient and less humane Roland.
Yeah. And then, I mean, so I that's totally true. And then the book kind of starts to get weird for a bit here. And okay, a bit more weird. It gets different. The tone changes a little bit. Things are happening that we kind of scratch our head and be like, what? And so in this moment, Roland brings back the plate to Margaret, and he says he brought it back to her, held it out, thy tool. For a moment she didn't take it, only looked at him with a species of bright hate. "Why do you mock me, Roland? How do we know Vaughn took me from the Manny clan? Tell us that, I beg." It was the rose, of course, an intuition left by the touch of the rose, and it was also the tale of her face, which was a womanly version of old Henchick's. But how he knew and what he knew were no part of this woman's business, and he only shook his head. "Nay, but I do not mock thee." And then we, the reader, are forced to kind of be like, hey, wait, what the fuck is going on here? They're talking about Henchick, who is the leader of the Manny. And if you note, I wouldn't even bring this up in last week's episode, but while Eddie is talking to people and doing his politicizing, Roland is off talking to other people as well. And one of the people that Roland has a long conversation with that Eddie sees that Roland is very interested in is a conversation with this old bearded man who we are just now learning is a person named Henchick, who is the leader of the Manny. And it's just kind of weird, and it's just kind of different from the way he's done things in the past, and this kind of confusion he's putting on his reader. And I've thought about this a lot, Matt, because it's one of like these confusing instances that I think is different in the way that King normally handles his writing. And my theory on this is that he's doing this intentionally to reflect that disconnect within his quartet, to reflect the breaking of the fellowship, to reflect the loss of Kef, the loss of this bond. That, like, why don't we know about this? Why is this being introduced to us like this, and not like he's keeping secrets from his Kef mates, and now he's keeping secrets from us too. That things are being held back from us, and we're like, why is this the first we're hearing about this very important conversation you had with the leader of the Manny, Roland? Why are we hearing about this just now? And why is it being demonstrated to us in this moment that makes us scratch our head a little bit? And I think that's intentional. I really do. It
does push a feeling of distance between us and Roland that I haven't felt since like the Gunslinger, really, where we were just kind of getting to know him, and didn't particularly like him at that point. Like, I like that idea. I had my own interpretation of this, actually, which I think is maybe going to be unintentionally funny, like many of my theories and interpretations may end up being in hindsight. Okay. So this is the kind of thing I don't usually like to do, because it's like a pointlessly negative way of approaching a story that I don't usually find productive. But honestly, when I read this, I just assumed that what had happened is that King was like going through this book on like the 5th draft edit pass or whatever, and was like, shit. I need to establish that Margaret Eisenhart is one of the Manny before chapter 7, when I rely on that information having been introduced, but I deleted the scene in chapter 6 where I revealed it. So where do I introduce that information now? I guess I can just stick it in the middle of this conversation that they're having. And I mean, I know I've written enough things to know that sometimes you kind of have to do stuff like this, right? Like,
sure.
I wouldn't be surprised if I'm completely wrong and your theory is closer to right, but like, my honest thought in the moment was like, this is a piece of information that was added post facto by necessity. Now where this became fun for me and not just kind of a criticism, and I don't know how serious I am about this, but I was like, what if there's some like metaphysical connection between the rose and Stephen King, the author of the story? And then maybe when the story says, why did Roland know this? It was the rose. That means Stephen King couldn't figure out a better way of doing this, so he just had Roland magically know it. And we're going to call that the rose.
Yeah, that's really fun. I like that. I like that a lot. I mean, I read this section several times, and I don't even know what she's getting mad at him about. You know, like that's the weirdest part about it. Like, yeah, the closest thing I guess that she has some weird shame or hangups about having come from the Manny, but yeah, but how specifically did he mock her about that? I don't know. We just don't know yet. Like, it's weird and it's different. And I will certainly cop to the fact that, writers, even great ones, are human beings who sometimes just fuck things up and make mistakes and have to paste over it as messily as possible to make things connect to each other. Totally. And I love your theory. I love it to death.
Yeah.
I just have so much more fun when I say, okay, this was on purpose.
Sure.
I don't like it, but it was on purpose. Okay, why?
Yeah. Well, I don't think I would have even mentioned the idea that I thought it was a writerly oversight if I didn't also think, well, maybe he made a writerly oversight and then decided to play with it and play into the idea that the author is going to literally show his hand here in the form of the magical rose,
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much.
Again, I think by the end of the story, I'll know whether I was off base or not, because if there's no metatextuality to the idea of the rose, I mean, there is metatextuality to the idea of Ka. Yeah. So I already feel like I have a bit of evidence there, but I don't really fully understand the rose yet. So cool. Anyway, it was fun for me to put that together, even if it's complete bullshit.
And it's fun for everyone to hear it.
Cool.
Trust me.
Cool.
So then Roland happens to see like a few cowpokes just hanging out, and they observed Margaret's Ariza throwing. And then he walks up to them and does what any sensible person would do. He threatens to fucking murder them all if they tell anyone about what they saw here. Speak of it, and I'll kill every one of you. Jesus Christ, Roland.
Yeah, this is that like kind of cruelty and behavior we haven't seen from him in a while. And
yeah,
it's funny because at first I didn't get it. I think maybe I do get it now, because I was like, doesn't everybody know about the Ariza throwing as like it's a common thing that all the women do, right? Like, but he has some plan in mind. I think after reflecting on it, I'm like, okay, well, he doesn't want. He suspects there's a mole, and he doesn't want the mole to know that he is aware of the Ariza option. So,
that was my take too, as well. Because I mean, after this moment, we see him begin to scheme, right?
Yeah.
And he starts asking a lot of questions about Andy specifically, and we don't really know what to make of that. Why Andy would be programmed to not tell them about the wolves if he was built way before the wolves started showing up, right?
Yeah.
And nobody has a good answer to that question.
Yeah. It's very fun how stunned they are by this question.
Yeah, they just have literally never thought of it before.
Yeah.
They just have never connected those dots before. And because like Andy has just been a staple of their lives forever. He's just been there.
Isn't he also like, they describe him as being fairly physically powerful.
Yeah, he's fast. He's powerful.
He's dangerous. They don't say that word.
No, because he's never done anything to them.
Exactly. But the king is planting seeds for, okay, this is actually a pretty potentially dangerous robot that we might have to, that might not be on our side when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I mean, he's laying it on pretty thick. I mean, from Eddie's first conversation with him, where Eddie like left this conversation not feeling good about this thing, to Roland's like general like, ugh, robots.
Yeah, right.
King is hinting at some stuff here for sure.
Yeah.
And then we get Roland's kind of layout of the strategy here. Like he looks at the map that was made and sees this cave that only has one entrance, and it reminds him of the canyon back in Magus. And he tells them that his plan is to maybe hide all the kids in the cave and protect them there, and that he will use the kids as bait, because he will assume that the wolves will go to where the kids are, and then they can thin their numbers via this box canyon. Basically, it's a cave, but same thing.
Yeah.
But then we actually see Roland tells us, the reader, that that's fake. That's a fake strategy. One he wants to put out there, hoping that the wolves might catch wind of it. So he's, as you said, he's smelling a mole and he's planting a mole hunt here. And then the chapter ends with this line that just scares me so much. Yes, but I'll need to trust someone with the whole truth eventually. Who? Not Susannah, because Susannah was now 2 again, and he didn't trust the other one. Not Eddie, because Eddie might let something crucial slip to Susannah, and then Mia would know. Not Jake, because Jake had become fast friends with Benny Slightman. He was on his own again, and this condition had never felt more lonely to him. And you just kind of want to be like, Roland, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, like we get to feel okay about this by the end, because Jake is like, this is stupid, I need to fix this.
Yeah.
But in this moment, absolutely, you're like, oh, come on, I thought you knew better than this. I thought you had learned.
Yeah, and his reasoning gets more sketchy as he goes down, right? Like, not Susannah, because Susannah was now 2 again, and he didn't trust the other one. And you're like, okay, I can see that, Roland. Not Eddie, because Eddie might let something crucial slip to Susannah. That's, I mean, unkind to Eddie, Roland, but I guess I could see that. Not Jake, because Jake had become fast friends with Benny Slightman. So like he's treating him like a kid, basically. Yeah. It's like he's friends with this kid now, and there's no way he'd be able to keep that from this kid.
Yeah, and
it's just like, I don't know about that.
Right. I mean,
he like loves and respects you a whole bunch, Roland.
Well, and the whole thing has been like, Jake's childhood is practically over. He thinks and behaves as an adult, and he's just getting and Roland went out of his way to give Jake this almost like a last hurrah of childhood, and now he's sort of revised history and been like, actually, Jake is just a child. And it's like, I want to say, like, Roland's not really being honest with himself here. Like, I think he almost just like wants to bear this burden by himself. Like, he wants to. I don't know. That's my vibe anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to fall back into those old habits, especially like as he's, kind of channeling the rites of old with this whole 3 questions things, right? It's very traditional gunslinger stuff. And so he's kind of falling back into that.
Yeah. I think what I was missing originally was this idea that Roland senses a mole. But then I caught on to that eventually.
Yeah, he doesn't come right out and say it. Yeah. He just kind of is like, I don't, something's going on here. Yeah. Someone's passing on information.
Right. And I don't think the text really tells us Roland suspected foul play, but then later we see that there definitely is a mole from Jake's perspective. So.
Well, the funny thing is, in my opinion, and we're going to kind of get to this as we go through these next 2 chapters, but a lot of these chapters is repeated information. We have characters learn the same thing or come to similar conclusions independently of each other. And I think that just once again goes to reinforce what King is doing here, that like that the Katet is broken, that Kef is not happening anymore. And so like we're redoubling information because they're not communicating with each other. They're having to learn these things on their own. Like there's this beautiful moment where Eddie says like, oh, the Ariza plates, I'll have to tell Roland about that. And it's like, he already knows, Eddie. Like, it's like, this is not the way this group operated before. They were such a cohesive unit that you wouldn't have this doubling up of information. And now that's splintered a little bit.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think honestly, we're seeing the Katet tested, whereas before we've only ever seen it function. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of which, let's move on into Chapter 6, Grandpare's Tale. So while Roland and Jake are over at Cy Eisenhart's place watching some dishes be thrown, Eddie and Susannah have gone over to the Jaffords to hear an old man tell a story. And notice, like, we've been talking about the mental separation, but notice that we've also physically separated our Katet again. Like, this is a perfect symbol of the disconnect, that the group has broken up. They are apart from each other mentally and physically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
I love that Eddie finds himself so like content in this place. Like it's very similar to the opening of Roland's chapter, where he was just like watching the kids play and then just feeling this sense of contentment. This is a life that he could see himself. This is a life he could see for himself, where he sees Tien and Zalia and their life together, their simple life together with their children running around. He sees this and he kind of wants it. It's a feeling he's never had before.
Yeah. Like as with the start of the last section, we show how how pleasant this place is, how worth saving it is. We anchor Eddie specifically in the first kind of moment that we've had with him in a long time, where he can imagine some sort of life that isn't just like, well, I have to see the tower now. Like it's because he went from being a heroin junkie to being a tower junkie unfortunately, which is very sad, really. Like it's not something we talk about a lot, but it's actually fundamentally a sad thing to have happened to this character. And here he has this image that he could just maybe stay here. And I mean, I don't think that's what's going to happen at all because, that just wouldn't work storytelling wise. But it's a beautiful moment. There's a lot of bittersweetness in this whole Eddie section, actually.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, King choosing to bring the Runt brother and sister of this husband and wife pair into this idyllic scene kind of breaks that illusion a little bit and shows the cold, hard truth of this seemingly idyllic life is that they live this life of constant fear that one of them will turn into these people. And like King really plays up the heartbreaking nature of these people's existence. Like I love when Tien sees Zalia's brother. He's holding his junk because he needs to pee, and it's like, you need to go pee, don't you? And it's just, it really emphasizes what these people are and what their lives are and what this whole thing is. And it's like, it's so sad. It's so sad. And I think like we get to see how they treat the Runt ones through Eddie's eyes. Like when we first saw Tien using his sister as a horse plow, like we were horrified, but from the character's perspective, this was entirely normal. And now we get to see the truth of that through Eddie, and he is appropriately horrified as well. But we also get to see him confront them about that, and they just are very just factual about their life. Is that like, yeah, it seems awful, right? But like, what else is she gonna do? This at least gives her a purpose. It gives her something to do. Like, do you just want her life to be just like sleeping and eating and then going back to sleep and eating and like that like what do you want? What do you want from me? Like what like and I gotta say I'm not entirely comfortable with that explanation, but I do get it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I mean, I think I've said it a million times. King uses Eddie so perfectly as the audience surrogate consistently in these stories, and he's thinking the kind of stuff that we've been thinking in the back of our minds. And like you said, we kind of get it. Eddie kind of gets it, right? He gets one over, and then kind of King is able to use Eddie to put our worries to rest. I think because we trust Eddie. Mm-hmm. Eddie's a good guy.
Yeah. I think you're right. Like it's still tough. It's still tough because I mean I think there's a lot of comparisons to mentally disabled people we can make with the Runt ones, right? And I don't think King is like inviting that comparison to be made, but it just was in the back of my mind while I'm reading this. Yeah, and it makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I have small kids, and so my by far like most immediate basis for comparison and basis for thinking about this is just how children are. This is just how like a 2 or a 3-year-old is. Well, they'll literally be standing there grabbing their privates, and you have to be like, you need to go to the bathroom, don't you? And they're like, no. And then they're like, yes. And then they go. It's like it's very mm-hmm. It's just like this. And like honestly, for me reading this part. And I get that this is probably because of where I am in my life, but like for me, it actually activates all of these like parenting instincts toward the Runt people. I'm like, I want to take care of them. I want to protect them.
Sure.
Which is interesting. I don't know. I think the reaction that you're describing is probably closer to what King is going for. It's just like I saw so much of little kids in his description of their behavior here that that was where my head went to.
Yeah, I like that. As someone who doesn't have kids, I did not go there, but I like that a lot. I like that. So then there's this part where Eddie is kind of prepping Tien for the conversation he needs to have with his grandfather. And Tien is like being a dick. He's like he has a complex relationship with his father. I think it's his grandfather. Yeah. And Eddie like just wants none of that shit. And he says, what the hell did he do to you, Tien? 'Twasn't what he did to me, but what he did to my dad. That's a long story and nothing to do with this business. Leave it. No, you leave it, Eddie said, coming to a stop. Tien looked at him, startled. Eddie nodded, unsmiling. You heard me. He was 25, already a year older than Cuthbert Allgood on his last day at Jericho Hill. But in this day's failing light, he could have passed for a man of 50, one of harsh certainty. Eddie fucking Dean, folks.
Yeah, deep steel, motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Of course, we learn what this story is later, and it's terribly sad.
Yeah, it's very sad, yeah.
But it's moments like this that make you just love Eddie. You know, it reminded me of Money Talks and Bullshit Walks.
Yeah.
He's always ready to hold the line when people are being dumb. He'll just call them out.
Here's another angle on this that I'm just thinking of right now. Because the first time I read it this time around, I was definitely like, fuck yeah, Eddie, fuck yeah. It's also very Roland, right? Mm-hmm. Like even the one of harsh certainty, like that is a very Roland-esque description.
Yeah, right.
Could have. So the question is this a good thing? Like it is certainly important. It is. He only cares here because he needs to get the story, and it's not like he's trying to repair Tien's relationship with his grandfather. He just says, "Leave it alone right now because I need his story."
Yeah.
So it's just the cold-hearted efficiency of a gunslinger that says, "I put your shit aside, not because I think it's good for you to put your shit aside, but because I need this story."
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe if it were just this moment, then I might say, "Oh, this is a foreboding development for Eddie Dean," but it's not just this, because then he goes and he gets the story from the grandfather,
sure,
and then he really understands what happened, and then I think the implication is that there's going to be healing of some form coming from his involvement here. I may be overly hopeful about certain things there.
I mean that's the way I originally read it too, and it's the way I want to read it because I love Eddie Dean.
Yeah.
And I think that a common thread throughout all these chapters in this book has been Eddie Dean's growing maturity. And I think that this. You can look at this as an emphasis of his maturity, that he is older than Cuthbert now. He is more mature than Cuthbert, but also even more mature than a person of his age. That he is growing up and and handling these things. I think, and it's a great contradiction with the jump rope session, which is inherently like a childish thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So Eddie and Tien eventually start talking about Andy. And once again, our characters are talking about Andy. And a lot of this conversation echoes some of the suspicion that Roland felt towards the robot back in his chapter. Like, what is Andy's game? They're talking about how he helps them with certain tasks, but doesn't with others. Like, he won't plow for them. He won't do any manual labor for them. Matt, what's going on here?
I mean, there's some indication later that Andy may either be the mole or may simply be like a go-between, who, he may actually be this thing that does harken back to the olden times, but he may have been like reprogrammed by either the wolves or by their masters, with Directive 19. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I am now. I'm just assuming that Andy is something that's been co-opted to be used as a spy and tool.
Okay, cool. Then Eddie joins in on a jump rope session. It's this beautiful little scene that I think once again reminds us of the idyllic beauty of this place and what these people are fighting for, right? But it also, like, it's this high flying, like crazy fast jump roping session that of course has to end. I think that's the biggest point of it, that like eventually one of the people is going to get tripped up and it's going to end. And in this moment, he looks over at Susannah. And we have this line. He gazed up at her seriously from the dust of the dooryard. He knew that however much she might love him, he would always love her more. And as always when he thought these things, the premonition came that Ka was not their friend, that it would end badly between them. If it's so, then your job is to make it as good as it can be, for as long as it can be. Will you do your job, Eddie? With greatest pleasure, he said. Have I mentioned lately that I really fucking love Eddie Dean?
Well, I think we could stand to do it a few more times.
Okay, I really fucking love Eddie Dean.
I love your connection there between the idea of frantically jumping rope as well as you can, but knowing that eventually the rope is going to hit you and everybody's going to collapse, and equating that with this whole story of them just, dodging bullets as frantically as they can. And then as soon as, you could take it all the way literally and say, as soon as the first one of them gets struck, they all fall. I don't know if that's maybe overdoing the metaphor there, but it's definitely ominous, especially in conjunction with the premonition that things would end in poorly between them. It's my reaction there, of course, is it's really too bad that Eddie's psychic powers are misfiring so badly, because to think that things would end badly between them is a ridiculous idea and obvious bullshit. But I'll hear no more of this. It definitely bittersweet, I think, is what I said a second ago. And there's so much of that where there's this beauty, there's this sweetness to it. And then it's like, but this can't last. And this is going in a really bad direction.
Yeah. And despite that knowledge, what does Eddie choose here? Like, it's your job to make it as good as it can be for as long as it can be. That is your job. Will you do your job? And of course he says yes, because he's Eddie fucking Dean. And it's like, I will always love her more than she loves me. I know this, I acknowledge this, and I feel things are not going to end well between us. But all I can do is love her as much as I can with the time I have. And that's it's sad, but it's inspiring. Like, I love him. I love him so much.
Yeah, me too.
So after dinner, Eddie starts talking with Grandpere about his time with the wolves, and the first thing we learn is that it actually wasn't him that killed it. It was old Molly and with an Ariza, and this is the point where Eddie's like, other weapons. I will make note of this and tell Roland. But Roland already knows.
Yep.
Because the kef is gone between them. There's this disconnect.
Yeah.
So then the old man begins to tell his story, Matt. And his story is about a group of 4 of them standing out on the old road, waiting for the wolves to come, waiting to fight them. And I love this line here. They stand across the road with their boots in the flowery dust. They stand blocking the road. And what fills Jamie like a blessing is a sense of grace. This is the right thing to do. They're going to die here, but that's all right. Better to die than stand by while they take more children. Each one of them has lost a twin, and Pokey, who is by far the oldest of them, has lost a brother and a young son to the wolves. This is right. They understand that the wolves may exact a toll of vengeance on the rest for the stand they're making, but it doesn't matter. This is right. I just fucking love this. I love this so much.
Yeah. I don't think there's an explicit connection, but I think that the idea of grace immediately reminded me of the rose, and like they're sort of almost being granted this feeling of peace because they're making the right choice here.
Yeah. This feels of the rose. This is of the white, right? This is honor and standing up for what's right. And just like you said with Margaret, this is an emotional appeal, right? This is the emotional argument that they're trying to make to the people of the Calla, that it's better to die than stand by while they let your children go. And even if they exact a toll of vengeance for you doing this, it doesn't matter. This is what is right. This is what the right thing to do is. And sometimes you just have to do the right thing and not worry about if there's hay under your feet.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, this little posse of people who stood up to the wolves are being very much a quartet, being very much gunslingers. I mean, it ends terribly for them, but they really are acting like gunslingers, and it's interesting because, I love the moment a bit. I don't know if it's a bit after this, I think, where old Grandpa Jaffords admits Tien has a streak of my attitude of like not being able to accept things and standing up to things, which strikes me as a very gunslingery attitude.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's so funny because when Tien first said they need to do something, it was Grandpere that was like, "That's stupid, boy." And we learn at the end of the story that he actually is like proud of him, and he's like, "Yeah, I want you. Like I'm proud of you saying that. I'm proud of you doing that." Yeah. I love this whole thing.
Yeah, me too.
So, Matt, we see in this story the wolves in action for the first time. We see their light sticks, their green cloaks, their sneeches. What do you think about them? What do you think?
All right. Well, I mean, they're using fucking lightsabers and golden snitches from Harry Potter as weapons, and they wear, I'm guessing, green elven cloaks. Okay. I don't know what the gray horses are from. I don't get that yet. It's probably another pop culture reference. It might even be another pop culture reference in movies that were out between 99 and 2002, because first of all, that's the time frame this book was being written, and that's also the time frame in which Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was released in 2001, Fellowship of the Ring was released in 2001, Star Wars Attack of the Clones was 2002, and The Phantom Menace was 99. So what the fuck, Scott?
What do you mean? What do you mean?
What is this? Why? And Eddie Dean wouldn't know about any of this. I mean, he knows what Star Wars is. But I think I don't remember what. But
he should know Star Wars.
But he wouldn't know about the golden snitch. Sorry.
No.
What the hell is going on, Scott? What the hell?
Well, maybe that's why he doesn't immediately recognize the golden snitch, because he doesn't know what it is. Yeah. I am so glad that you picked up on this, because it was really hard not to say anything. Like we even got a couple emails after the first meeting where they were talking about the wolves and describing their weapons, where people were like, "Why didn't you mention the Harry Potter reference?" And it's like, because I wanted him to get there.
Yeah,
and I knew you were going to get there.
What's funny is I did think that back then. At that time, I can't prove that now because I missed the opportunity to say anything. But I was like, wait a second, it's a flying projectile weapon thing that is called a sneech. Like that's a snitch. But I didn't think, and then also they described lightsabers, like, okay, they have lightsabers.
No, they're light sticks, Matt. Yeah, come on.
Whatever. But then I had to go like a level up and be like, oh, it's just a random sampling of pop culture things. That's what's confusing about it to me.
That's pretty weird, right?
That's pretty weird.
That's pretty weird.
Anyway. I'm sure we'll figure it out eventually.
Yeah, totally. All right, Matt. The 4 wolves wipe out the 4 humans, but not before Molly takes one of them down with her Ariza. Jamie Jafford survives barely due to like a slightly misthrown sneech, and one of the wolves, and there were 3 remaining wolves ride on, and then Jamie, left alive in a ditch, gets up, walks over to the dead wolf, takes off his mask, and sees... Well, the book doesn't tell us what he sees, Matt. It doesn't tell us at all. King almost... He's doing like a reverse Stephen King here. Like, and I want to talk to you about this for a while, because as you know, and our listeners might not, but as you know, this is a pet peeve of mine in storytelling, where a character learns information and we are in the head of the character, but the author randomly chooses to not have the character think about the information in a way that we learn it as well. It intentionally masks us from it. And that really bothers me. I think it's just like fake. It's like, it's unearned tension. Like, it's just doing it. There's no in-world reason for the character to not be telling us this, right?
Yeah. Well, it's the sort of thing where a million times in this show we've been like, I really like how King never does this sort of thing that he's doing right now. Yeah.
So, like I don't like this. But as part of this project and as part of all the deep dives into books I try to, whenever this happens, to step back from myself and go, okay, I don't like this, and this is not something he does very often. So then, is there something more going on here? Is there an underlying reason for why he has structured the reveal this way, besides just, ooh, it's fun to fuck with my readers? And I'm not confident in this. We can't read the author's mind, of course. I think the decision to hide this information from us is connected to every other instance that we've been talking about this week about weirdness and representative of the disconnect to the quartet. They are not one anymore. They are not linked together as a unit anymore. They are splintering. They are breaking apart. Jake, in the very next chapter, makes this textually explicit that this is happening. We are no longer a quartet. And we, the reader, are further, because our characters, our group that we love and cherish, are broken, are further apart from each other. King has removed us from them as well. King has pulled us back from them as well. They are keeping secrets from each other, and now they are keeping secrets from us. And I don't know if this is true, but I like it a lot.
Yeah, it's like our Kef with Eddie is broken.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do like that a lot. It's so unusual for King to do this in such a blatant way too. Mm-hmm. Like this isn't mild. This is the thing we've been wondering about the entire book, in a sense. Mm-hmm. What the hell are the wolves?
Yep.
And then he pulls this. You're like, well, this is. We have to talk. We had to talk about this one way or another, because it's such an unusual choice. Again, said it a million times. He usually does the opposite. I'm just going to say it right out. He usually does the opposite, where he tells you, he looks at the camera and says the wolves are actually so and so, but the characters didn't know that yet. This is total opposite of that.
Yeah. So what do you think? What is the answer? What do you think the wolves are? What did he see here that when Eddie learned this, everything changed for him?
Yeah. So my first guess is that he recognizes them as being either his own twin or the twin of someone who was taken, rather he recognizes it as being someone who was taken, meaning the wolves are the twins who are being taken, and they're being brainwashed and then used as tools. And then maybe the root ones that come back are actually clones or something along these lines. I don't know. Like that was my sort of, that's how this sort of thing would go in a story like this assumption.
Sure.
But I'm entirely open to the idea that it's another pop culture reference. I don't know.
Let's see. What year was it? It was 2003. It's Britney Spears.
He recognized it as Britney Spears. There you go.
Cool. Well, we'll keep reading and see if we find out.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to our final chapter, chapter 7, and get ready for the goosebumps. Chapter 7 is titled Nocturne Hunger, which is a really good table setting for what we're going to get here.
Uh-huh.
So we conclude this week's reading on, it's not just a Mia chapter, but the chapter is primarily dealing with Mia. She's back in the castle again, desperately looking for the food. She's starving. It says his time is coming and he needs food to finish the becoming, which is just terrifying.
I wonder, do you know if this came out before or after Red Dragon?
I don't know.
I didn't think you would, but I know that's what the Red Dragon character, that's the phrase that the Red Dragon character uses too. Anyway, that's might be a reference, might be nothing.
And of course, the best thing about this chapter, and the most horrifying thing about this chapter, is what King is doing to us, because he has established how Mia's dreams work already, in that she sees a castle, but she's actually somewhere in the real world. The entire time, we're like, where the fuck is she? What is she doing? Everything she's doing here, what is she doing in real life, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't know. We don't get the answer to that question.
Oh my God. It's so horrifying. It's so horrifying. It's so utterly upsetting, intense, and horrible. Mm-hmm. I think this is like the first time that I was genuinely not just like frustrated, but like upset that the week's reading ended here, because I had this like horrible dread in my gut when I had to stop. It's just like genuine, just like dread. Very good job, Stephen King.
And I love the way in which he's built this chapter to intentionally echo the last one. We have the same basic setup, but that same basic setup serves to highlight the things that have changed. Mia is no longer in a dress. She's wearing jeans and a t-shirt with some pig on it. The food is no longer here. The banquet table is empty and the plates have changed. They now look like blue 4 special Arizas. And instead of Roland being here observing it all, it's Jake. So the dream, the setup, the structure of Mia's nighttime hunting is the same, but we're in a different place now and things have changed. And by defining things first, these changes jump out at us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure what what we're doing with Mia exactly yet. I think I'm just going to let you get through this part while I just kind of make uncomfortable noises in the background.
Okay. So Jake watches as Mia goes into the kitchen and opens the oven. She sees a rat eating a roast in there, skewers it with a fork, tossing it away. Then she goes to town on the roast herself, all the time screaming, "I's hungry," which is just the repetition of "I's hungry." HONGRE, or GRY rather, is horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying. And Matt, we are once again forced to consider what is actually happening here. What was the rat? What was the rat? And what is the roast? And King knows we're thinking of this because then he does this. For one instance, she thought the roast, which had been done to a skin-crackling turn and only gnawed by Mr. Rat in one place, was the body of a child. And yes, she supposed that a roast pig did look a little bit like a child, a baby, someone's chap. But now that it was out and she could see the closed eyes and the charred ears and the baked apple and the open mouth, there was no question about what it was.
Why? No. Yes. God, I hate this. Fuck. You made me read this and then wait a whole week. Fuck.
Is Mia eating a baby?
And I mean, obviously, even like you're thinking it when you're reading this part, but then later he has Eddie think the same thing basically, and you're like, oh no, oh God,
yeah. So Mia finishes eating and takes off her shirt to kind of wipe her face with, and finds it's actually a shirt for the Dixie Pig, best ribs in New York. And as a just reminder for you, Matt, this is not the first time we've seen the name Dixie Pig. Back when our quartet was toe-dashing to New York on Toe Dash Night 2, they saw in the place of the "See the Turtle of Enormous Girth" rhyme, they saw this. "Oh, Susanna Mio, divided girl of mine, done parked her rig in the Dixie Pig in the year of 99. Hey, Matt. What's up?
1999. We're talking about, 1999. That's much later than the other time periods we visited. It's much closer to, number one, the release date of this book, and it's also the general vicinity of the release dates of all those movies we just discussed, which is probably not a coincidence, since nothing's a coincidence. Obviously, Susanna Mio is a reference to Mia, so it's sort of. I don't know, man.
What is the Dixie Pig, and why is Susanna Mio parking her rig there in 1999?
I don't know. It reminds me of the Dixie Chicken.
I wonder if we have any A&M listeners listening right now.
Let us know.
'Cause nobody else is going to get that reference.
Yeah, let us know if you get that reference.
Just a lot of questions. A lot of questions being asked here, right?
Yeah.
So then we leave Mia behind, thankfully, but it doesn't get easier here because we cut over to Eddie, who is awake in the middle of the night and kind of watching and listening to Susanna/Mia go on her nightly hunt. He actually compares seeing her wander around to the movements of those little robots in Shardik's lair way back in the Wastelands. These lost things without purpose, which I think is a pretty it's a great and horrifying comparison here.
Yeah, right. I mean, those creatures and kind of their proximity to this door to the space between worlds or whatever the hell that was, it just made the whole thing have a really creepy resonance to me.
Yeah. And we see, though, eventually she finds the purpose that she was searching for, and we see that Eddie is worried for the exact same reason we are. Is Mia eating a child? No, Eddie concludes, no. She probably just killed and is eating one of the young pigs that were on the farm property, right? Right? It's fine.
It's fine.
It's fine.
Probably, yeah. Probably. I love yet again. I mean, I know I'm repetitive sometimes, but Eddie's standing in for us so well, right? He's like, probably right. I mean, King wouldn't do that to us, right?
Yeah.
But then he can't fall asleep because it's gnawing at him, and that's the feeling we leave the chapter with.
Yeah. I mean, I love the detail of Eddie having to wipe the blood off her face, right? That like normally Mia would like clean up after herself. And in this case, she just goes right to bed, and it's Eddie who has to like clean her face up.
Yeah, she's either slipping or maybe it doesn't matter as much anymore.
Yeah, we're closer to the time.
Yeah, that's what I figure. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny because Eddie didn't tell us what the wolf looked like, and now King isn't telling us was it a baby or not. Right? It's another. It's an unusually suspenseful cliffhanger that is more or less artificial. I mean, and in this case, it doesn't annoy me. It's just information that our character reasonably doesn't know because he didn't see what happened, right?
Yeah, it's not a cheat, right?
Yeah.
With Eddie before, it was a cheat,
yeah,
because there's just no reason he would not be thinking of that and we're in his point of view. But yeah, this is Eddie doesn't know. Mia doesn't see it that way, and Eddie doesn't know. And Jake, in his dream, was not in an angle. Yeah. To know for sure. Or well, Jake is seeing what she's seeing because he's toe dashing.
He's in the dream or whatever. Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah.
But he but it is King hiding information from us in a way that he often doesn't. So
true.
that's the thing about this chapter is there's a lot of that happening here.
Yeah, and that's why I'm confident in this. This is all intentional and meant to reflect the splintering of the Fellowship, because if it was one of these things, it was a one-off, I would be much more willing to chalk it up to a mistake or just King wanting to be cute or something like that. But it's just like you keep stacking them up, and it's just like, yeah, it really seems like this is by design.
Yeah. Yep.
Especially when we get to the last third of this chapter, which is Jake basically textually saying what you and I have been thinking. So we cut over to Jake, and turns out, unlike Roland, who was following Mia while awake and seeing the real world, not what she was seeing, Jake has dreamed his time with her, or went toe dash, or something. He realizes that the dream was more than a dream either way, and that he needs his first thought as a sensible member of this quartet, perhaps the only sensible member of this quartet. I gotta go tell Roland. I gotta tell Roland about this.
Yeah. I mean, it's good, right? Like it makes us happy that. Well, okay, let's go on. We'll talk more.
Yeah, because the very next thought he has is, "Oh, Roland already knows," and this is his shinin working. This is his touch, right? That is working to bring this information to him. Yeah, because he says Roland already knows. Oh, and Eddie knows too. And he's heartbroken, right? He realizes that they are keeping things from each other, and he realizes what we've been talking about, that these secrets have splintered the quartet. They have broken us apart, and he doesn't know what to do. But and we have this brief moment where he says, "They know better than you. They're grown-ups." And I want to talk about this for a little bit, because this is a Kingism. King writes about children a lot and the experiences of childhood and children. One of the big things about it was that as children, there was a power in childhood. And basically what I'm saying is that I think King, to the bottom of his heart, believes that the phrase "they know better than you, they're grown-ups" is absolute bullshit, because so many of his books are about how adulthood, or being an adult, or seeing things from a more mature perspective, clouds your judgment and makes it so you can't see the things that are right in front of your face. And I think that is fundamentally true here, that all these characters are acting in these ways, are doing these things, are damaging their connection, and they can't see it. But Jake, still a boy for now, right? He's almost out of boyhood, but not quite yet, can see the truth.
Yeah, his quote unquote naivety is actually his power here. Yeah. I mean, I really love the "my understanding of the truth" refrain coming back here in this moment. It really hit me hard, actually.
It's really good. Yeah, it's a really good reference. because that was a defining moment for Jake, right? And he's recontextualized in his understanding of the truth now is that they are no longer Katet, that the secrets have broken the fellowship, and that they cannot beat the wolves unless they are together, unless they are Katet. And I love both the wolves of the Calla and the wolves of New York. We have to beat both of these wolves, and we cannot do that if we're not a unit.
Yeah.
And it's so great. It's such a great moment of realization.
It is. It's great, and it gives you hope, but also fear because they are all spread out. Everything is moving, seems like it's moving fast. You have foreboding, you have bittersweetness, you have dread in some cases, and you just really want everything. You really want them to come back together and pull through, and also you have like a credible feeling of doubt that it's going to work out well because King has done his job of injecting that sense of uncertainty and tension into us.
Yeah, and it's really, like, structurally, I think it's really great because we've been talking about this for 3 weeks, but the book, it finally only really started to confront this fact today. And which is not to say that King wasn't building up to this. He absolutely was. He was just, you start subtle and then you kind of turn the dial up a little bit until you get to a point where your characters have to interact with that salient fact that they are falling apart.
Yeah.
And it's so great. And yeah, you have to ask yourself the question, like, Jake basically resigns himself. I have to talk to Roland. I have to convince him. I have to do this. And you're like, okay, but which Roland are you going to get? Are you going to get the Roland that loves and respects you and acknowledges that you are on the threshold to adulthood? Or are you going to get the Roland that sees you as a kid that says, I can't trust you because you have a new friend, a new little boyfriend? Right. Which Roland is going to be there when you confront him about this?
Yeah, this is one of the many things that worry us, for sure.
Yeah. But so the chapter ends. Jake is out camping in the middle of the night, and he's awake. And as he decides that he must try to convince Roland, Andy, the messenger robot, suddenly is there again. This is the third chapter from a third perspective, and here's Andy again, the messenger robot, parenthetical, many other functions, is meeting in secret with Benny's dad, Slightman the senior. We don't know what they talk about. We don't know what's going on there. We just know that there's a meeting, and we don't know what to make of that. It seems like they were doing it in secret in the middle of the night, and we don't know what that's about.
Yep. And of course, Jake sees it because Ka.
Because of Ka, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you get the feeling as this chapter wraps up, like, okay, things are going to start happening really fast in next week's reading. And then, the question is, will the Katet be able to reunify and repair their Kef in time to do anything about it?
We'll find out next week.
I'm worried, but yeah.
Yeah, that's it for the chapter. We will be finishing up part 2 next week. We will be covering both chapters 8 and 9. Is it 7 and 8 or 8 and 9? It's 8 and 9.
It's got to be 8 and 9.
The final 2 chapters.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The final 2 chapters of part 2 will be next week's reading. But first, we got to talk about some discussion questions, Matt. And we are going to go through this discussion question very quickly because y'all really like vampire stories. We got a lot of answers to this question. So we're going to kind of just run through them very quickly. Lots of great answers. Let's just do it. So our question was, what's your favorite vampire story? And let's begin, Matt, with the first one.
All right. Puller 420 says they'd have to go with Salem's Lot at the moment because they're currently reading it. But of all time, they would actually say Dracula because Bram Stoker is a genius at getting under the skin, and they say it's a hard to narrow down question.
I have never read Dracula. That is a big hole in my bibliography or whatever. I really need to read Dracula.
Yeah, I think the word is radiography.
Is it?
No, I just made that up.
Because I know bibliography is wrong, but I don't
know the word for the books that you've read.
I'm going to call it radiography now.
Okay, good.
It's officially the term.
That's the term now. All right.
Okay. Next, we have Geek to Live, who also says Salem's Lot. Like many others, I love the slow burn of the setup and the vignettes of how the regular townsfolk get turned.
Cool.
Yeah.
I have a feeling we're going to get a lot of Salem's Lot answers.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Zach K says Salem's Lot. They say it's one of their top five favorite King books. They say that it's got a lot of his more poetic and artistic writing. But they actually say that their favorite vampire story would be the prequel, Jerusalem's Lot, and the sequel, One for the Road. Short stories. I don't really understand what these are, honestly, because I haven't.
So Stephen King wrote a story called Jerusalem's Lot that is technically a prequel to Salem's Lot. Okay. He also wrote a short story called One for the Road that is technically a sequel to Salem's Lot, in that just they happen before and after the book and center on the town.
And of course, The Dark Tower is also sort of sequel to it.
Sure.
They go on to say that King just portrays his vampires in a really interesting and novel way.
I really liked, Zach. We don't have time to read it all, unfortunately, but I really enjoyed your depiction of how King portrays vampires and how that ties into King's general thoughts on evil and monstrosity. And I think this is something that we'll have a lot more to say about if and when we read and talk about Salem's Lot.
Yeah, awesome.
Next up, we have Dark Gazing, who says, I don't go in much for vampires myself, but if I'm picking, it's The Lost Boys. Every time. Saw it again recently for the first time on big screen for its 30th anniversary. It came out the year I was born. Oh God, I'm so old. Anyone who sees it, who's seen it, knows how awesome the Frog Brothers are. Tim Capello, who does the greasy half-naked saxophone solo at the start of the movie, recently reprised his role in the gunship song Dark All Day, which is a massive homage to lots of vampire movies in the 80s and 90s. I like Lost Boys a lot too. How about you, Matt?
I haven't seen it.
I was worried this was going to happen, and now we're going to get emails.
It's so weird. I'm learning so much about myself because I didn't think that I didn't think I had blind spots. I watch a lot of movies. Mm-hmm. Why? What's the cause? Anyway,
it just happens, man. Just happens.
It does. It's true. I shouldn't be so hard on myself. All right. Mm-hmm. Karena 2020 says their favorite vampire movie is The Lost Boys, a la the 80s. The Frog Brothers as vampire warriors against Kiefer Sutherland and his evil clan are epic. Favorite book has to be Salem's Lot, hands down.
You were right. Lots of Salem's Lot.
Yeah.
Luke V also answers The Lost Boys. While the movie is super cheesy and full of 80s camp, it still holds a special nostalgic place in their heart. As a child of the 90s, I'm normally not a fan of most 80s media, but something about this movie has always stuck with me. Lost Boys. There we go, Matt.
That sounds awesome. It's got Kiefer Sutherland and vampires and 1987. I'm in.
What a year.
I'm watching it as soon as this podcast is over.
I don't believe you.
You're right. No, I want to watch it though. Mm-hmm. Cool. Pear Jane says, yay, vampires. I love nearly all vampire stories. Like Donna on Parks and Rec. If it has a werewolf, vampire, or fairy, I'll read it. But I always come back to the original Fright Night. It's such a classic vampire story and knows it's a classic story and even features Roddy McDowell playing Vincent Price. It follows all the classic rules, a woman from the past, a spooky caretaker, shape-changing, crosses, but what really makes it shine is that it just wants to be a really good vampire story. The music is all electric bass moodiness, the special effects are fun, and the supporting role of Evil Ed is tragic and sad. Most important, Chris Sarandon as the unsexily named Jerry Dandridge will always be the gold standard of forbidden evil allure. No one in film history has ever made a crew neck sweater look so sexy.
Have you ever seen Fright Night?
Nope.
Man, yeah, it's I think you would just have we'll fix you. It's fine. It's fine.
I guess I just didn't ever have a vampires phase.
That's fair. It's fair. Next up, we have Divide by Hero, who says, my favorite vampire story? Buffy, obviously, even though it may or may not actually be a vampire story, as much as a great story of empowerment set in a world that happens to have vampires in it. As dated as it may feel in today's world of movie-budget TV shows, it's not dated, it's perfect. That was a Scott aside. The characters and overarching themes and arcs are just great all the way through, especially in the later seasons when the themes really start to get dark and emotional. The Angel spinoff also has some magic going on, although it's a very different show. This reminds me, as it has many times before, that I really need to check out all the comics set in the Buffyverse. And let me tell you, Divided by Hero, no, you don't. You don't need to check those out.
Oh,
do yourself a favor and don't do it. Obviously Buffy is technically my answer too, although I agree with Divided by Hero here that it feels disingenuous to call Buffy the Vampire Slayer a vampire story. It is not that. Like, it is not. It uses a lot of the vampire tropes, but it is not a vampire story.
Sure. I mean, I think you could count it if you wanted to. I haven't seen it, so I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, we know, Matt. We know.
Oh, this is so painful. Anyway, Christina L. says they like the idea of a world where a supernatural opposite to a vampire exists, someone born to slay them. They go on to say, I particularly loved that it was a 16-year-old girl who was super strong. She was a natural leader, and I don't think I had seen as strong a female character as Buffy on screen before.
Yeah, I think I cut off the first sentence of that, but Christina also said Buffy.
Clearly choosing Buffy, yes.
Yes. The Amazing Duck 42 says, my favorite vampire story is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. In it, our protagonist is the last human on Earth after a pandemic of some nature turns everyone else into vampire-ish monsters. But without spoilers, there is something going on in that world that doesn't quite match up with the narrative. It's such a good story, emphasizing isolation, what our perspective of the world can turn us into, and was one of the first books I read that introduced me to the idea of an unreliable narrator, which is now one of my favorite types of characters. Awesome.
Yeah, I love those.
I have not read I Am Legend. I did see the movie that was not as good. That stupid ending that they should have kept the original ending.
I know.
Stupid.
That's the worst thing ever. I'm still mad about that. If you're not familiar, you can find the original ending on YouTube, and it almost fixes the movie, actually.
Yeah, it's like test audiences suck.
It's a horrible idea to use.
Never listen to test audiences.
No, don't. Coach Wargo says the Passage series is a great vampire story set in a post-apocalyptic world, because some of us like stew, is what they say here. I'm just reading what they wrote. They also like NOS 4A2, which is a great Nosferatu.
There you go.
Which is a great twist on the vampire genre.
Yeah, I read the Passage books. I liked those books a lot. They are channeling some Stephen King-ishness, which is why I enjoyed them. Good series overall. Nosferatu is actually written by Joe Hill, who is Stephen King's son.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Up next, we have Holy Frijoles 161, who says, my favorite vampire story has to be the historically accurate Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. It's a fast-paced, blood-soaked trip through history with Honest Abe as your guide. What could be better?
Indeed. I remember this being in theater and I missed it for some reason.
Yeah, there was a book. I did not read the book, but I watched the movie. It was one of those late night, like HBO. It was on HBO, and I was like, fuck it. I'll watch Abe Lincoln kill some vampires. Let's do it.
Was it great?
I mean, it's fine. It's fine. It is exactly what it says on the tin.
Perfect.
It is Abraham Lincoln killing vampires.
Perfect. Little Metal Pixie says my favorite vampire story has to be Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. Salem's Lot is another, and as much as I'd like to give this one to King, I just can't. Anne Rice caught a little bit of magic in the series that only begins with Interview with the Vampire, and I devoured every last one of these like almost nothing I've ever read. It has everything I love about a story, just like The Dark Tower, a sense of layered immersion in a story that draws you in and makes you want to stay. Characters that you love, hate, and hate to love, and an otherworldly and dark backdrop to the stage of their tale. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I haven't read them actually. I've only seen the movie, but I think that the Interview with the Vampire film, I just think of as being a great, canonical vampire story.
It's very, very good. I've never read any of Anne Rice's books. My sister loved Anne Rice in high school, and I think that just like when you're an asshole sibling, you're just like, well, I'm not going to read those because Cindy likes those.
Yeah.
And I like the cool Stephen King books, not this Anne Rice stuff. Yeah,
completely understandable.
Hexanthus says, Stoker is a classic, of course, and I do love me some Anne Rice too, but it isn't really horror vampire. Twilight is fun, of course, but awfully campy and teeny bopper. For my money, The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. If you aren't familiar, it's a kind of historical modern adventure with the trail of Dracula as the goal. Totally love Salem's Lot too, of course. Vamp fiction is my first favorite genre. That's awesome. I'd never heard of The Historian. I kind of want to look into that.
It's weird. Nobody has suggested Castlevania yet, Scott.
The Netflix show?
The Netflix show.
Fucking awful.
Yep. Complicated 9519 says, there's so many vampire stories, it's honestly hard to choose. I would like to say the anime Blood Plus is my favorite, but I know Scott's dislike of anime, so I will mention Interview with the Vampire. They also want to give a special mention to the Underworld series.
Oh, man.
I rewatched the first Underworld movie recently, just as a way to just make an evening disappear. And I was actually like, I remembered it being, I think it was just that it was made in a period of time when everything was a certain style, and now that style looks incredibly dated.
Yeah. I watched the shit out of that movie. That was one of my movies to put on before I fell asleep, that I would watch like 15 minutes of and then pass out movies. So I feel like I've watched that movie like so many times. I still love that they went practical for the werewolves, though. I still really like it.
Yeah. I'm that wasn't meant to be like an entirely negative comment. It's just like I was watching it and I was like, God, this is so exactly that year.
It's very like early 2000s. Yeah. Like it's just extremely.
Yeah.
And they made so many of them.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen them all. I think I owned them all, though. I think there was the Ultimate Collection and I was like, sure, why the fuck not?
I think I've seen the main trilogy. I don't know if they made more than that or not, but anyway.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 movies. No, there's 5 movies and a short film. And a video game.
I was only aware of 3, so I've seen those.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Shortstop88 says, my favorite vampire story is the 12-novel Darren Shan series called The Vampire's Apprentice / Cirque du Freak. I read most of them in middle school as they had them in my school library. The interest for the series comes from seeing the not-so-great but enjoyable film. I skipped the first book because I thought the movie covered that. Turned out that the movie covered roughly the first 3 books of the series and went over a couple of plot points that were later in the series. Have you... I've heard of these books before, but I have not read them.
No, I haven't heard of them either.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sounds interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Some YA vampire stories that aren't Twilight. Sounds fun.
Yeah. Cool. Mojo Yashka, they give a lot of answers, but then they say my current favorite would have to be the 5 Charlie Huston novels, starting with Already Dead. This is a series of vampire novels told in a noir detective style, similar to something written by Dashiell Hammett. I wish more people knew about these because the writing style and portrayal of vampires is something that's both a throwback and something new at the same time. He always has great dialogue, a great dialogue gimmick in which you get rapid fire conversation that doesn't identify who is speaking. Sounds fun.
If you can hear my keyboard right now, this is me writing this down because noir detective with vampires is extremely my shit, and I need to read these.
It is his shit, everyone.
Rebecca B says, I'm going to go into the comedy direction and say the 2014 movie What We Do in the Shadows. It's been about 3 years since I saw it, so I don't know if it's really as funny as I remember, but it's basically a mockumentary following 3 vampire roommates and what their lives are like. It explores a lot of comical aspects of what life would really be like as a vampire. I recommend it if you have an hour or 2 to kill. I think they made a TV series as well after the movie, which I haven't seen yet. If you end up watching it, I hope you enjoy it as much as I remember enjoying it. Rebecca, it is as funny as you remember, and the TV show is fucking great, and everyone should watch all of the What We Do in the Shadows. All of it.
Yeah, this has been on my list forever. I love the funnies. I love the vampires.
You would love it. You would love it. Absolutely.
I will watch it. Eric S. says, I'd have to say What We Do in the Shadows.
Yup.
And while the show was pretty great, I still love the original New Zealand-based Taika Waititi, Jermaine Clement film that the show was an Americanized spin-off of. And if I had to pick one that wasn't total comedy / satire / spoof, then I would pick Let the Right One In, the original Swedish film, not the Americanized reboot of Let Me In. While both are very good for a reimagining of what a vampire film could be, the original Swedish fare was so unique and different and groundbreaking that it takes the cake. Plus, the originals are almost always superior to the... I agree. I saw both. I like the Swedish version better as well.
I do too. I do think Let the Right One In and Let Me In are a rare case of where both are still pretty good movies anyway. Like, I agree the Swedish version is better, but I still think Let Me In is pretty good.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think I wouldn't argue with you on that.
Sure. Next up, we have Deborah, who says, if you strictly define vampires as blood-sucking, then nobody beats Anne Rice with Interview with the Vampire and the Vampire Lestat. The vampire tortured by his very nature contrasted with the one that delights in his own evil. And you can love them both. I'm so old that I have the cassette tape versions of the audiobook of Interview with the Vampire. That's awesome. I remember when we listened to audiobook on cassettes? I do.
Yeah.
I remember listening to Redwall on cassette. Actually, I was listening to Redwall on my talkback thing that was in Home Alone 2 that I made my parents buy for me because Kevin McAllister made it look so cool.
Yeah, I know. My first car had a cassette player. My current car doesn't even have a CD player.
Yeah, well, you don't need them anymore.
I know
you
have
an
don't.
iPhone.
It's just wild. It's just wild. Okay. Anyway, Daniel M says, I'm giving my vote to It. I love that Stephen King has made multiple vampire stories in which the vampire isn't your run-of-the-mill bloodsucker, but has a penchant for other foods. Pennywise is a prime example, but The Library Policeman and The Outsider also qualify. Well, that's kind of interesting. So basically, they're saying that Pennywise qualifies as a vampire because of kind of the way it behaves.
Yeah. You will understand that
sure.
when you read it.
Sure.
Notice I said when.
Sure.
We have Susan S., who says, I stand firmly in the Buffy camp. Yes. Joss Whedon's intertwining of classic vampire lore with the ongoing struggles of growing up have always been a favorite. I am also willing to admit enjoying the last book of Twilight. That's okay, Susan. I'm sure they're good. I've never read them. I've loved the clan aspect and conflict with the governing board. Sorry, not really so into it that I remember the name. Oh, and I guess I should throw in an Interview with a Vampire. Not sure if there is much literary merit in any of these, but hey, that wasn't the question, wasn't it? No, but screw literary merit. Everything has literary merit.
I mean, we're asking about vampire fiction, which is inherently genre and highly tropey. So it's screw literary merit. That's our motto.
Here's what I'll say about the last Twilight book. Haven't read it, but I did see the final Twilight movie because the girl I was dating at the time made me go to that movie.
Uh-huh.
And it's not a good movie, Matt, but there's an action sequence in the middle of this movie, Matt, that is the coolest shit I've ever seen. It is insane. It is insane. I was like, my jaw hit the floor. I was like, what is this? Are they all like this? I turned to my girlfriend at the time and was like, are they all like this? And she was like, no.
Super curious about this now. Which movie is this?
I will find the scene is most definitely on YouTube. I will find it and send it to you. Okay. It's batshit.
All right. That's great. It's great to hear. Stephen D says, my favorite vampire story was the 1985 movie Fright Night. They say I haven't seen it in probably 30 years, but I remember being a kid watching it over and over with my friends in a dark basement. I don't want to rewatch it now because I'm not sure it would hold up, but it did the trick back in the day. It fueled our fascination with vampire lore and set the stage for establishing rules about vampires for us. Even today, when I encounter a vampire story, my brain always references Friday Night to see if it follows those rules.
Why do you keep saying Friday?
What? I don't know.
I think you really want it to be the weekend.
My eyes are not working. They also say they finished reading.
This is just a cool thing they said to us that I wanted to mention because I thought it was cool.
Yeah, they finished reading Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff. They say, I don't remember which podcast, but I distinctly remember Matt saying that it is a book to be read. Now that I've finished the Kingslinger podcast for the week, I'll be listening to the 2-part discussion you guys made in 2016. Not the type of book I'm normally drawn to, but I really enjoyed it, and I thank you for your recommendation.
That makes me happy because that's a really great book. I can't believe that podcast was in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, the audio quality may be beyond the pale, and I apologize for that.
It will be bad. We were new at this. But really good book. Everyone should read that book. Nothing to do with vampires, but very good book. Michelle Y says, my vote goes to a pair of stories in King's Nightmares and Dreamscapes called The Night Flyer and Popsy. I'm listening to both because King himself in the story collection suggests the prime vampire in each tale is the same character. What I love is how King adds something new to typical vampire subgenre, a vampire with a pilot's license, who is in other ways the stereotypical Bram Stoker trope, down to the native graveyard soil and vampire with family. I just recently reread Nightmares and Dreamscape, so I've read both of these stories very recently, and The Night Flyer was made into a film, and I have not seen that adaptation. So I heard it was not very good, but I really want to watch The Night Flyer. I'm very curious about it.
Interesting. I never heard of it. Although the name reminds me of George R. R. Martin's Night Flyers, which is probably completely different, but I do know that sometimes authors reference each other in ways like this. So I don't know. Kevin says, my favorite vampire story is the movie Dracula 2000. Not because it is the best vampire movie ever made, but because of the origin story, which is unique to this movie alone. The movie better explains why crosses, silver, holy water, wooden stakes, and daylight are so deadly to vampires. In Dracula 2000, the original vampire was Judas Iscariot. Because of his betrayal of Jesus, God cursed him. As he hung from the tree and died watching the sunset, it was to be the last sunset he would ever see, yet he was cursed to walk the earth for all eternity. Death was to be too good for him, yet darkness was all he deserved. Now, cursed to be a creature of the night, he hates God, and holy symbols are deadly to him and all that he creates. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I like that lore too. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Judas she's got a bad rap, man.
I know, yeah. You know, I just remembered what my actual favorite vampire story is.
What is it?
In my head. It's Blind Sight. It's science fiction novel.
Does that count?
It absolutely counts. They're even vulnerable to crosses, and it's a hard science fiction novel. If you're curious, please check out Blind Sight by Peter Watts.
It was a good book. I enjoyed that. We did a book club on Blind Sight. Yeah. It's a very Matt book, which I mean in the nicest way possible.
I think I've said before that it's my favorite novel. That may be true. I'm not.
Yeah. All right, that is it. As we said, bunch of answers rather. Thank you so much, folks. I have a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun answering these, especially when you guys are as into the question as you were this week. So that was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots more stuff for Matt to watch.
Yeah. Wow.
All right, this week's question in honor of the lightsaber-wielding, snitch-throwing wolves. What is your favorite pop culture reference in The Dark Tower up until this point? That is an important clarifier at the end. Please do not spoil the books for Matt. And by pop, it doesn't have to be just pop culture. Like, what is your favorite book reference or poem reference? What is your favorite reference to something external to these stories that is in these books up until this point? Again.
Yeah. Cool.
Makes it be a fun one.
Yeah.
I like when they're fun. We get more answers than when I try to be like overly complicated and be like, explain the theme of something.
I think it's good to have both kinds, but yes, this kind is very fun.
Sure. All right, folks, that is it for us here this week. As we said earlier, next week we conclude part 2, Telling Tales, by talking about chapters 8 and 9. Will Callahan's story finish? Will we find out how he got to the Calla? We'll find out next week, Matt.
Yeah, all right. Remember, you can reach out to us at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit, reddit.com/r/doofmedia is maybe the best place to give your discussion question answers.
Yes, of course. And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we really, really recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else you can listen to podcasts. I think that's basically all of them, but pretty much anywhere else.
Yeah. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. If you donate at the $10 level, then you'll gain access to our suite of bonus audio content that we produce each month, including now it's like a couple of basically secret podcasts.
Ooh. Yeah. We just released a new episode. We're gearing up on this bonus content stuff. This is something we want to deliver to people, like with that stuff that's one-off stuff that is not enough for like a full show. But we're having a lot of fun with it. And two of our network co-hosts, Jarvis and Matthias, who do a writing prompt podcast called Do the Right Thing, which are if you are a writer, listeners, and you need like some encouragement to write, it is a wonderful podcast and a wonderful project that kind of encourages you to write a little 30-minute short story every week. It's really great. You should check that out. You can go to doofmedia.com and look for Do the Right Thing, and you'll find out all about it. But they talked about an anime on their podcast. It was an anime that people made Matt and I watch, and we didn't like it because it's anime, but they did, And so they talked about why we were wrong.
Yeah.
And it's good.
So, I mean, we're basically serving all of the possible markets here. The didn't like it because it's anime market, and the did like it because it's anime market.
Yeah, those are the only two markets.
There's two types of people in this world. If you like our no, I already did that part. Special thanks to our new patrons this week. Bidoofs, Michael G, James Y, and BH Wilder, and new Doof dancers Creeping Dread and Jeff W.
Ooh, Creeping Dread. I like that name.
Yes, reminds me of this week's reading.
Yes.
Thanks for your support. We really appreciate that.
Yes, thank you all so much. And for all those of you out there that cannot afford to donate right now, that is absolutely okay. Keep sharing the podcast. Keep plugging it on your Stephen King subreddits and Facebook groups and all that stuff. That's hugely helpful. And of course, keep leaving those ratings and reviews. I see that number of reviews we have tick up every week, and it warms my cold vampire heart. This week's Spotlight review comes from Tomcat4638, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Great format. As I near the end of my second trip along the beam, I discovered this podcast from the Facebook group Dark Tower, and I have just listened to the end of the discussion of Drawing of the Three. The format is a great idea. It's my first time hearing seasoned reader and new reader format, and I love it. Say thank you. The hosts offer insights and ideas about the material I haven't considered, even though I've read through the series twice. Almost. Keep up the great work. Long days and pleasant nights." Well, thank you so much, Tomcat. That was very nice of you.
Yeah. And we've got a whole nother one of these new reader, old reader podcasts if you want to check that out.
Yes. Check out doofmedia.com. Look at all of our shows and see what interests you.
Yep.
And you can listen along. All right, folks. That is it. We're done, finally. We will see you back here next week for the conclusion of part 2 of Wolves of the Calla. Long days and pleasant nights, not present. Well, both. Long days and present and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number of presents.
I like presents.
Then here you go.